Mr. Agaga, quickly before I come into the studio. So, having been in this space before, would you have said that, I mean, if you had been in pole position as interior minister, or if you had been involved in this, you would have refrained from deploying the military in this instance? Is that correct?
Absolutely. And so we have been urging government to resource the police, train them in a way that makes it possible for them to deal with some of the internal security challenges we have had in this country. Look, the police are very capable of dealing with some of the challenges that we record in our country if you give them the appropriate training and resources. I'm happy you talked about the orientation of the police vis-a-vis the orientation of the military. The two are totally distinct and different. So you want to use the police for internal security operations. Their orientation, their psyche is totally different.
Right.
The orientation of the armed forces is different. But, of course, when things get out of hand and the police are clearly overwhelmed, you would see the signs. In that case, you want to use the military. But bottom line is, let us resource the police. Let us have confidence in them to deliver. When they are overwhelmed, oftentimes they themselves would call for military intervention. But what we see is that we even have situations where political figures, for reasons best known to themselves, would at the least slightest provocation call in the military to suppress, the people they themselves lead. So it's as simple as that. Let us read through the police. I'm happy. In recent times, we are talking about having regional SPUs. And so all the regional capitals are now going to have SPUs. If that happens, that is a branch of the police that is better resourced. They are well trained to deal with internal security challenges.
Right.
When they are overwhelmed, of course, you bring in the military.
All right. So an interesting point I'm going to note down and run by the other guests as well, the politicization of the military. Is that really happening? And is that leading to some of this, not trigger happy, but military deployment happy scenes that we've been seeing? But let me bring in, right before I come back into the studio, Kofi Siao is our Eastern Regional Correspondent. Kofi, a very good morning to you. What is the picture now in Nuaso? Walk us through what happened yesterday and what's the current state of that municipality is now.
Okay, so currently the place is tensed, I should say. From yesterday morning till now, the military have been assisting the ECG officials to ensure that they install the prepaid meters. They started from Nuaso, where the incident of vandalism and attacks started happening. The military and the ECG officials had been complaining of the fact that some of the residents resisted the operations they went to undertook. Some of them also tried to pour hot oil on them. So that necessitated them to also, come out with the attacks on the people, because they had to indeed protect their officials from being harmed by the residents. But when you speak to some of the residents, they say that the attack on them was unprovoked. They were not in any way in any tussle with the military or the ECG officials. And so they were surprised to hear reports of, attacks on these officials that led to the military brutalities on the residents in the area.
So just to confirm, the people say that this was unprovoked. There was no resistance, because I just want that to be reiterated. We've heard that there was some resistance. The people are saying there was no resistance. The military, task force, were they able to prove in any way that the people had resisted? Okay,
so they were able to prove that by showing to us a number of things they were able to seize from some of these residents. That included some machetes, some catapults, and a few other implements they were able to seize from these residents. So they believe that the residents are resisting and are also, threatening their lives in that regard. So they would also go all out to protect the staff of the ECG and their personnel deployed to the area.
But of course, we cannot confirm that these were actually taken from the people, can we?
Well, I cannot independently confirm that, but these are claims from the ECG officials.
What would you say? I mean, we heard from the ECG officials reacting to this. Has the military themselves, beyond what they told you in this regard, have they reacted to the situation? Have they had any interactions with the people that we know of?
No, the military officials, I am told, were brought there specifically by the ECG officials. So if the media wants any information as to the work of the military in that area, they would have to contact the ECG PRO in the Tema region. And she has been very cooperative in that regard. Anytime there was an issue and we contacted her, she responded quickly to the issues we raised with her. So the military itself hasn't come out to speak. It is the ECG officials who are speaking. And I think that it is because of the fact that it is the work of the ECG officials and the military is only assisting in that regard.
Kofi, what is the atmosphere in Nuaso this morning? And I'm sure the people have been speaking to you. I've seen some who had cane marks on their bodies, some whose bodies had been bruised with blood oozing and all of that. What exactly do they say the military did to them? And maybe moving forward, how are they going to cooperate with the ECG task force? What have they been sharing with you?
Okay, so one person called Ebenezer Taipadi, he is a resident of the area. And if you watch the video, he sustained injuries on his chest and back, and he claimed that the military officers hit him in the head with the butt of their rifle. And this man tells me that he was in the company of friends. The military stormed his residence and they didn't ask him anything. All that he saw was that they started brutalizing them. So the rest had to run for their life, but he couldn't. And he was attacked mercilessly, according to him, by the military official. So he was able to, leave the scene and decided to report the issue to the Nuasu police station. And he believes that the police will do a good work by making sure that the perpetrators of this crime, as he put it, are brought to book.
Are the people willing to collaborate with the task force moving forward? Since they say they were not resisting the installation of prepaid meters, I mean, what have they been sharing with you? Are they willing to prevent any further escalation? Are they willing to do that?
So Ben, they are saying that they are not against the installation of prepaid meters, according to them. What they say is that they want the ECG to engage them on the modalities they all agreed on in ensuring that the prepaid meters are installed in the area. They say that most of the people lack so much information on prepaid, the installation of prepaid meters. Some of them claim that these are really accusations, they cannot substantiate. They say that they believe that the old bills that the ECG, gave to them are going to be put on these meters. So, in fact, the assurance that the ECG has given them that they have referenced the old bills, they claim it's not true. So if the ECG is now coming to the area to install prepaid meters, they believe that they will find a way of, fusing that bill into the prepaid meter. So anytime you went to, or you go out to buy prepaid credit, the bill will automatically be deducted.
So that is the fear, the suspicion of the people. In fact, I have a message here from Jobless who says, why are people not talking about the overbilling by the ECG, which the ECG has accepted? We know that the ECG is trying to find some way of arriving at some understanding with them in terms of the backlog of payments. But finally, has the ECG reacted to that issue? If they have, what have they shared with you? Hello, Kofi. We've lost Kofi. If we can reconnect with him, we'll get that final bite and move on. But let me come into the studio. So this is the development. The deployment of the military, first of all. Let's start from there. It's not standard practice, but Professor Vladimir Imchidanso says, when the times call for it, you must do that. James Agalga says, no, it was not necessary. Where do you stand on that?
I think, first of all, the role of the military is well defined. Simply put, they are trained to shoot and to kill. But there are very limited circumstances or situations where the military is brought in, and it's standard practice all over the world, largely, where when situations overwhelm domestic policing rules of the police service or local security services, you bring in the role of the military, you ask for reinforcement of military, and they come in. They come in to support or provide a supportive role for the security or local security forces. But in this country, for a very long time, we have been talking and complaining about the very, very regular use of the military. It undermines the military in many ways. It undermines the goodwill and support the local population has for them, because too often it results in, abuse of human rights, brutalities, and things like we're seeing now. And so it's important that we have a very clearly defined, policy going forward on what occasions or under what circumstances should we deploy the military in domestic policing roles. We've seen the feature of the military in election-related security, domestic situation, local and regular protest from civilian populations. We've seen the role of the military deployed in these circumstances, leading to further violence. One of the biggest roles of, the police is not just to detect crime or prevent the commission of crime,
right,
but to protect life, liberty, and property, which we are not seeing. They are actually undermining, life, undermining property, the preservation of property and the liberty of citizens, which we are seeing.
That's the military.
The police we have,
right,
they are meant to protect this, and yet our leaders, people in authority undermine the local policing, authorities that we have, bring in the military who undermine these things on these values that the police are meant to protect. And I think that it's getting to levels when there's fatigue, when we get fatigued with these kinds of things, citizens will respond in ways that undermines everyone's security. And that does not look well for all of us.
Is that what we are seeing in Nuaso?
We are seeing that happen. We're beginning to see that happen. Citizens taking the law into their own hands. I think you saw during COVID and subsequently, our interface with the military has significantly changed. If you look at what happened during, the elections or before elections, the registration exercise and COVID-related security operations, it clearly shows the disdain or public disdain for the military, which traditionally is not the case. The military is the leading agency, the authority that command the highest level of respect and goodwill of the Ghanaian population. We've seen how the military has performed internationally and local operations where their roles are clearly defined. But we're beginning to see that change significantly. And it's because we have created, exposed them, to the public, interfacing in roles that they are not suited to, to intervene, which is not good for us. So I think that the ranking member talked about, we need to resource the police if we think they are not adequately resourced. We have the FPU, we have several security,
that's the police unit.
Yes, who are very well trained and properly trained to deal with these kinds of situations, rioting, riot control and protests and all kinds of situations like this. It does not call for the role of, the military. And I think that it's about time we had, government come clearly stating government policy or an approach to dealing with,
So we
involving the
need to
rural
take a
laws and-
second look at the entire mechanism, system, where we deploy the military.
Sure, we don't have, this situation doesn't call for the role of the military. The citizens, the conduct of the citizens, so far I have seen, does not constitute a belligerent force. We're not seeing any, arms or weapons or conduct,
Of course, if this were rioting and other
rioting
matters,
is a traditional police role.
destruction of
If
public
you- if-
property, and it's escalated to certain points.
If you
the
have
military
a
would
situation of
probably-
rioting and things like you've described, and you anticipate that it would escalate to levels beyond traditional policing role or capacity, you can call for the military support. But when the military comes in, it does not take charge. The military stays behind, for reinforcement when
So
things
it's
escalate. They are providing a supportive role, not a lead role, which we're not seeing happen in this case. You see, we are normalizing violence and weaponizing the grievances of local populations. The
We are
provision of electricity,
normalizing violence.
violence from the security services. We are normalizing it in a way that undermines everyone's respect and goodwill for the security services. And that's why you can find that average young, frustrated person can engage, as a police officer. Because you've seen it. People beat up a police officer in situations, we've seen it too many times. Even trotro drivers and the maids, encounters with police officers, we see them, beat them up or things like that. It is ugly. It does not speak well of us.
Let me just run this by you, because mention has been made of that. I think it was James Agalga who made mention of the politicization, correct me if I'm wrong, of the military as well. In recent times, we've heard of some, and these are allegations, that top officials of the military are being sidelined, when they are meant to move into, higher ranks. Their careers are being tapered off or are tapering off, and that officers at a certain level who are older, who maybe should be moving on, are staying put. I mean, there's a whole mess there. But when it comes to the deployment of the military in such instances, is there any element of politicization that you see in there?
Well, these are complex matters within the services. All the security services have their own internal politics, and that relates to promotions and the responsibilities and rules that they assign to them. And you clearly talked about...
But I'm talking of politics a la, let's say, the executive getting involved and maybe the military being willing to pander because maybe the leadership or this or that feels a certain affinity. That's what I'm talking about.
It is pervasive. It's pervasive. Within the police service, within the military service. Of course, my reading is that, of course, it's much less in the military services compared to the police service, and it is something we can talk on and end. If you talk to people within the services, they will tell you at a certain stage, it's significantly influenced by politics. Your role in terms of a promotion and the assignments you get to do, the tasks, the missions, and all these things are significantly influenced by politics and the politics of the nation or political party, your affinity to a particular political party. It's been there. It's not new, but it's been more pervasive. That's my reading. It's been more pervasive within what? Yes. Within what period? Within the military service, within the police service, it's been more pervasive than it had been.
Do you see it to be more pervasive now as compared to when?
It would be difficult to pin dates, but my reading is that in the last 3 years, I've seen, and you see it when you engage people within the services. In the last 3 years, I've engaged a lot of people within the services, and this is what people tell you. Even, promotion within younger people within the services or junior officers, significantly influenced by politics.
Let me come to you, Professor Ntwi-Danso. So, especially in that unique role you play, where you find yourself. Is this politicization as pervasive as the other guests are claiming it is?
Well, I do not think so. It's a human institution, so they have their own rules and regulations as to promotions and rules at whatever level. And we may sit behind and we might not understand what goes on. It's part of the defense management, and defense management
starts from enlistment to retirement, and the amount of resources that you put in place for the ability to be able to play their role within your threat horizon and as to what you really want as your defense policy. And the main thing is this, that in every of the institutions, as one of your panelists said, there will be that kind of politicization within. It may not necessarily be government which does not want Mr. A or Mr. B, but then within, it everywhere, in the academia and everything, your promotion may be disturbed by your head of department or whatever it is. So it is always there. I can't count that out. But then there are some other things we may not understand. For example, just that you are a major doesn't mean that your next level is lieutenant colonel and then you will get it. It also depends on the courses you have undertaken and what marks you got during those courses and things like that. It depends on a lot of things. So we may not understand. So I wouldn't say that that is the reason why the military behaves the way they behave. My friend James mentioned that hooliganism or vandalism should not have ended with such a thing. But if hooliganism is a crime, we must understand. Hooliganism and other kinds of vandalism. Vandalism is a crime. And again, one of your panelists was talking about the situation where we need to employ the military. No government official has any right to ask the military to come in for intervention. Your correspondent said the military was a task force of the electricity company. I don't know, but it can't happen. It can't happen because it's against the law. It is only the police that has a right to call in the military. You know.
But correct me if I'm wrong, because I know that, there have been instances, whether in Ejura or in other places, where you would have, for example, a political actor like a DCE and others calling for, not just the police, but military intervention. Is that wrong?
Very wrong. If you are
but it's happening.
If you are a very good military officer, you don't take instruction from the civil authority. You don't take instruction from the civil authority. And, we have had instances where military officers have defied that kind of calls. And as I said, by their training, the training we give them, when the police are very much overwhelmed, and they are the only persons who can tell where they're overwhelmed, and then they bring in the military. And the military will only take instruction from their hierarchy. And then they are deployed. They are deployed on terms as per what is given them by their constitution and by their rules of engagement. And when they go in, one of your panelists said that the police stay behind. No, it is interagency cooperation then. When they go, they don't stay behind. In fact, the police at times hand over fully to the military, who finish their intervention and then report back to the police. In fact, they hand over back to the police when things have calmed down. It's called the engagement with the civilian authority. And when that happens, it's not that the military has to. They have they will even tell the police what they want to do to calm the situation. So it's not true that the military can be called in by entry down, so I am so and so come in. They would not obey until one of their commanders have given order that, because of X, Y, Z, go and deploy. And the deployment have rules. In fact, the use of force has its own rules and of engagement. And so if you disobey any of them, even the bullets that are given you, you need to account for them. So all these things are there. But it's a situation where at times when they are deployed, things invariably happen. Casualties, etc., etc.
Right.
We need to engage ourselves from that angle.
Right.
What are we telling the public also about our behavior, the rule of law, so that it will be rare for the military to be called in. It will be very rare.
And that is what I believe all of us are looking at. What Mukhtar has said, that it should be that rare that the people even get, confrontational with the military or get to even see them. And that is what has been re-echoed by James Agalga. But what is the way forward? I want us to move on and talk about what Mr. President has been saying about the security situation. But to wrap on this end of the conversation, what then do we do? The Krobo Ayeshe demonstration, we saw what happened. That was the police. We've seen the military also involved up north in different parts of the country, in Ejura, and what has happened. So What is the way forward? What are the solutions? What should we be doing from the standpoint of the military, also from the standpoint of the people in the Lower Manya Krobo municipality? Very quickly on that, I'll give about a minute to each of you to reflect on that, and we'll move the conversation forward.
Right.
I'll start with you, Prof.
Personally, I think we need to understand the problem. If you don't understand the problem, don't try solving it. I think the basic problem is that, as one of your panelists said, we are weaponizing violence. Violence has become a tool for expressing anything we want to express, be it in politics or whatever it is. The second thing is the wrong aspect of politicizing everything in this country, including even violence. And now, the military, I tell you, is a very disciplined organization. And that if you don't call them, they wouldn't come. If they come, they do what is expected of them because they have to account. And so civil-military relationship is what has not been properly put down. I mean, we don't understand the military. I think there's some PR must go on over there. And then the police, they are under-resourced. Even though IGP Al-Hassan did very well in bringing the FPU and others, we need to resource them very well. And then community policing must be part of our barracking. The police is a long overdue thing. If the police are staying among the people, they understand them. If the police stations are not far off from Manya Krobo and that kind of thing, and the people are staying among them, they would know that the policeman is just somebody in uniform in the same house with them. You know, these things have not been properly done. If we do all these things, and finally, the rule of law. This country is so much, how do I call it, indisciplined. There's so much indiscipline. And note, places where terrorism, we said we'll go to the president's thing, where terrorism has been festering well, are places where there is so much indiscipline. So we need to work on that also. If the citizens are very disciplined, crime is less, and such things like terrorism cannot thrive. So we need to work on those things also.
All right. Thank you, Prof. Just hold for me. And as you can see, we are gradually weaponizing violence, as was said by Mukhtar, Mumuni Mukhtar as well. But let me come to you, James Agalga. What is your take? What is the way forward in dealing with this situation?
Well, I think you touched on politicization of the security services, and I just like to point out that politicization is real, and it starts right from the point where the personnel are recruited. And I have had, occasion to complain bitterly about the mode of recruitment of personnel into not just the armed forces, but all the security services of our country. Ever since I made those complaints, not much has changed. So it's a continuous process. We see, people who are not fit, people who are not qualified, recruited into the security services. And you want to ask yourself, what accounts for that? Is it politics? In a way, the answer is yes. And that is where the politicization starts from. Look, as I speak to you, it's very worrying. And like it or not, there is tension right now in the military. There is tension within the police service. And it all has to do with promotion. Point systems which have been devised by, for instance, the military itself, are being sidestepped. You have a situation where officers are made to fill points upon assessment, and that usually forms part of the criteria for determining who is promoted and who is not promoted. But increasingly, there is some form of disregard for these mechanisms that have been instituted by the security services themselves to determine who gets what. Now, you have officers with questionable reputation. Some even have disciplinary problems who end up getting promotion to enviable ranks such as Brigadier General, while others who have built sufficient points to warrant promotion are sidestepped. When you do that, you have the security services divided along political lines, and that can be very dangerous for our security. Having said that, I would also add my voice. I think it's important that we understand clearly that the military can be deployed. The rules allow for such deployment. But when you take, for instance, what is happening in Boko, I don't think anybody in his right frame of mind would say the deployment of the military in Boko is out of place. And not at all. And in the case of Boko, I'm happy Prof made the point. I mean, very succinctly. Normally when the police get overwhelmed, it is they themselves who must call for military intervention. And once the military arrives, they take charge, stabilize the situation, report back to the police, and sit back. Those are the standard operating procedures that the security services themselves have applied over the period. But
right.
you have instances where politicians would sometimes take the law into their hands, order military intervention, even when the police have been called for it. That is where we normally have challenge.
Okay.
That must stop.
All right. Thank you for those quick reflections. Just hold for me. Mukhtar, so especially when he talks about the fact that because of this politicization of the military and the security services generally, people who are meant for promotion are not promoted, and we all know, I'm sure even as we segue into that next conversation about national security, that could also be problematic, because if your forces are divided, then it's easier to, for insurgency attacks to come in. But what would be your solutions for the lower Manya Krobo issue before we get into this one?
So,
and
clearly,
rather briefly, if you can.
Yeah, so clearly, we need that. We need cohesion within the security services, because we're dealing with security that requires everyone's commitment to the goal in terms of security. So we don't need to have those divisions or those grievances within the same security services that are meant to protect us. If you look at what is happening, the violence that is happening is generated out of inability to respond to grievances of the local population over there. If you remember, in June, one of the major protests and public demonstrations were a result of complaints by residents of overbilling by the new prepaid meters that they were installing, and yet they did not get any public forum or hearing to engage so they can address these challenges or these complaints. And this has built on to this point where we are clearly seeing a clear adversarial relationship between the local population and ECG, and to a large extent the security forces. So there's a need for engagement to address people's grievances. And this is a pattern that gets repeated, not just in the situation of electricity and the civilian population. In many other areas, when it comes to water, when it comes to public goods and services, these things happen because we fail to respond to people's grievances. And that we have to learn lessons from it. This can be repeated anytime soon if we fail to learn the lessons from this current engagement we're in.
Of course, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. So we must look at them. But let's quickly get into